Long-time listener, first-time submitter. I thought I would pick a story from my past. For some reason, it has made a resurgence and has almost become an unwelcomed guest in my mind. Perhaps sharing it will help me get over it once and for all. The year was 1986. I was 16 at the time. I was in Indianapolis at Union Station. It was around Christmas time or just after. I was with my mom, my 2-year-old sister, and my 21-year-old uncle. At this time, my uncle still lived in Indianapolis, while the rest of us lived in southwest Indiana. We were getting ready to leave and drive back home. It was very cold out that day, and I was bundled up in my jacket, scarf, and gloves. My mom, God rest her soul, could talk a dead man back to life. So I was just waiting for her long-winded wrap-up. It was getting hot standing inside Union Station while wearing all that clothing. So I told her, "It's getting too hot in here. I'm going to step out for a minute." My mom nodded, and I went out. There was no snow or wind, just perfect for me to cool down for a bit. Not even a minute or so of standing outside, right by the double doors, a white Chevrolet pulls up. 2 big men with crew cuts were sitting in the driver and passenger seats. They were at least 6'5", and probably about 280 pounds each. I figured they were probably from our local military base, but that was just an assumption. Immediately after seeing me, they stop at the curb, roll down the window, and smile. "Hey, come here. I want to talk to you," the passenger said. Bear in mind that I'm 16. If this were to happen to me today, things would be much different. But as a kid, I was very polite, almost to the point of being docile. I was always very apologetic when I thought I'd screwed up in some way. I looked up and I saw a streetlight above me. I looked back at them and started apologetically stating, "Oh, I'm sorry. This is not what it looks like." At that moment, it was more amusing to me. I hadn't really considered that I was in some kind of danger. They kept reiterating that they just wanted to talk to me, and I kept explaining to them that I'm not a street girl, and this is not what it looked like, and that I was sorry for giving the wrong impression. It didn't occur to me that they weren't listening to a word that I was saying. All of a sudden, the passenger gets out and starts moving toward me like a hungry dog staring at a T-bone steak. A switch went off in my head, and I was no longer apologetic or embarrassed. I was just pissed, and I yelled, "You don't have to get out of your car if you just want to talk to me. I can hear you just fine from here." I suddenly found the 70% Irish and Scandinavian heritage on my dad's side, and it came out in full force. I was proud of myself for having shown some backbone, but there was still a towering, hulking man coming right towards me. I bolted back inside, where my mom was still yammering. Upon seeing me, my mom and uncle were immediately alarmed. They hadn't seen the man get out of his car, but they could tell that I was frightened. I told them what happened, and my uncle asked, "What were they driving?" "A white Chevrolet." My mom then cut in, "Go get him!" My uncle bolted out of the door and down the street, chasing after the Chevrolet. "You sons of bitches, get the hell out of the car so I can bust out your teeth." My mom was livid, but I could tell that my baby sister was getting upset, so I tried talking her down. My uncle came back in a few minutes later, winded and worn out. When he caught his breath, he said, "I almost caught up with them when they got to that traffic light at the end of the block, but they peeled out right before I got there." Welp, that put a major damper on our trip to Indianapolis. The moral of the story is, ladies and gents, don't allow your good manners to supersede your own safety. Fuck that noise. Who wants to die being polite? I was born in a decently sized city with a population of about 100,000. I play hockey, and I go to school in the city. My family lives about 35 minutes south, on a farm, so every day I had to drive into the city for school and hockey practice. My team had an upcoming home game, so I was on my way into the city one day. There's roughly a 2-kilometer gravel road that you have to go down before you get to the main highway that leads directly into the city. Before turning onto the highway, there was a ditch where a derelict tractor sat. It had been there for about a month. As I passed by the tractor that day, I noticed something odd. There was someone under the tractor. Their head was hidden by the tractor wheel. It almost looked like they were trying to repair the tractor. But they weren't moving at all. It was odd. I didn't want to be late for the game, so I just kept driving. After my game, I met up with my mom before heading home. She liked to attend my games whenever she could. She then gets a call from my aunt. "You are not going to believe this, but there was a guy who had his head chopped off while he was repairing a tractor. They found him right around where you guys live." My heart dropped. I remember driving past that tractor merely 5 hours prior. He could have been laying there with no head. On my way back home, there was an ambulance, police cars, and men taking photographs. They hadn't removed the body yet. However, they did place a blanket over it. I don't know if I should put it this way, but it's a good thing that the big wheel blocked the view from the gravel road. It would have been difficult for me to see a headless corpse, but my mom had my younger brother with her in the car. If he would have seen something like that, it would have messed him up for life. This experience happened in 2019. At the time, I was 22, attending Brigham Young University in Utah. It was getting close to Thanksgiving break, and I was planning on traveling home to California the weekend before. My parents live in the Bay Area, and it was about a 12-hour drive to get home. Leading up to that Saturday, I was constantly checking the weather, because the Sierra Nevadas near Tahoe can be very dangerous to drive through when it's snowing. In years past, I could get through the Sierra Nevadas with relative ease, but of course, that year, the weather report stated that a huge snowstorm would be coming through, the day that I was supposed to be traveling. My sister, who would also travel home with me, decided to book a last-minute flight because she didn't want to risk driving through the snowstorm. However, being confident in my driving capabilities and not wanting to spend a few $100 on a last-minute flight, I decided that I would take my chances on the highway. Knowing that I probably wouldn't be able to make the drive in my 2014 Ford Focus, which was only a front-wheel drive, I asked my sister if I could take her Jeep Wrangler instead. She agreed, on the condition that I had to take her to the Salt Lake City airport the night of her flight. So the day came, and I began my 12-hour drive home, going north on I-15, and eventually got on I-80 west once I hit Salt Lake City. Driving on I-80 through Nevada was clear, as the snowstorm was coming from the west. I constantly looked to see if the weather would change, but each time I checked, the weather report remained unchanged. 7 to 8 hours into my drive, I saw one of those electric highway signs that stated that I-80 would be closed due to the severe weather conditions. I started to worry because it was around 5 p.m., and there was no way that I was turning around and going back. I stopped my car once I hit Reno for some gas and to think things over. I had two reasonable options that I could take: either spend the night in Reno or find another way through the storm. Being that I didn't want to spend the extra money to find a hotel, I made the choice to find an alternate route. I looked at my GPS, and I discovered that there was another pass through the Sierra Nevadas if I went south through Carson City. By this time, the storm had started to pick up, and I would have to drive cautiously. I was able to make it to the entrance of the Sierra Nevada Pass. There was a couple of road workers stopping cars to make sure that they either had chains or all-wheel drive. The Jeep was equipped with both. I had to drive slowly, between 10 to 20 miles per hour, because the roads were completely covered with compacted snow, with wind gusts set over 30 miles per hour. I had the defrost on at full blast, with the windshield wipers going maximum speed in order to see properly. After about an hour of going at a grueling pace, I became frustrated because I was making very little progress. I was in the middle of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, with forests on both sides of the road. The ground was completely blanketed by snow and ice. As the darkness crept in, I could barely see any other cars on the road. I had the Jeep in first gear, allowing me to engine brake, but I foolishly decided to increase my speed to about 25 to 30 miles per hour to escape the blizzard faster. The Jeep slipped right off the road and into a small ditch. Luckily, I wasn't hurt, because I hadn't really been going that fast. However, the Jeep was now trapped in deep snow, and when I pushed the gas pedal to get out, it wouldn't budge. After a few minutes of hopelessly trying to get out of the ditch, I realized that I would have to get out of the car and see if I could find some way to get traction. The temperatures had reached freezing outside, but thankfully, I had a winter coat that I could put on. I walked around the Jeep to see the entire situation that I was in. My best course of action was to dig the snow out from around my tires. I couldn't put the chains on the Jeep now, and I was stupid for not doing so earlier. I also didn't have gloves or a shovel, so I would have to dig with my bare hands. After a few minutes, my fingers were freezing. I got back inside the Jeep, and I tried to move it. It was only able to move slightly. I was still stuck. This is when panic began to set in. I hadn't seen another car in over 45 minutes, and it had no cell service, which was no surprise, being in the middle of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. I felt completely hopeless as I looked out my window and saw the maze of trees swaying in the blistering wind. I thought I could find some fallen branches or something that I could give my wheels traction with. I didn't want to go too far in case another car would see me and stop for help. I walked about 50 yards into the woods. I only had my phone flashlight on me, which didn't provide much light. I searched for any type of loose wood. Most of the branches were higher than I could reach. Luckily, I found a few fallen branches that weren't as thick. I snapped them in half so I would have more pieces to stick under my wheels. I then heard what sounded like footsteps. I stopped and listened. All I heard was the sound of the howling wind. I suddenly felt very uneasy. I was basically in the middle of nowhere, and I felt like someone was watching me. I had no idea why somebody else would be out in the middle of a blizzard at this time. I then saw a low-hanging branch on a tree that was thin enough for me to break off, so I quickly did so. As soon as I did, I heard the footsteps again. There was no doubt in my mind that someone else was lurking nearby. I squinted my eyes, looking around in the dark, pointing my phone flashlight in every direction. To my horror, I then saw the outline of a dark, hooded figure standing about 25 yards away. I looked at it for several seconds as they stared back at me. I was paralyzed by fear. My fight or flight kicked in. I turned around and started sprinting through the snow, back toward the Jeep. I could hear the footsteps trailing behind me. Whoever I saw was now chasing me. My mind felt like it was moving at 1,000,000 miles per second, and I knew what I had to do. When I reached the Jeep, I quickly shoved all the sticks behind both of the rear tires, knowing that I wouldn't have time to do the same to the front. Thankfully, the Jeep was still running. I dared not look behind me as I jumped inside and quickly locked the door. As soon as I did, the figure caught up to me and banged on the driver's side window.
Open up the door. Now.
It looked like he was holding some kind of blade in his hand. I looked into his face as I put the Jeep into reverse. The man's eyes were the eyes of a psychopath. I pressed down on the gas as the man continued screaming.
Open the fucking door.
I can only thank God that the Jeep was able to gain traction and back out of the ditch. The sticks must have given the wheels enough traction to get me back out onto the road. The man then threw the knife directly at my head. If it wasn't for the windshield, it would have impaled me right between the eyes. I could hear the man's crazed wailing as I took off down the road. I had to be extremely careful not to accelerate too fast, as I didn't want to end up in another ditch. I looked into my rearview mirror to see the man standing in the road, watching me drive away. I was on edge the rest of the way home. It took me 3 hours longer than it usually would have, but I eventually made it home after midnight, exhausted from driving and having been chased by a homicidal lunatic. Looking back, if I hadn't taken my sister's Jeep, I don't think I would have made it out. I also didn't bother calling the police once I got service again. I just didn't want to deal with filing a police report. I was tired and just wanted to get home. But I sincerely hope nobody else driving that night encountered that deranged man in the forest. Thank you for watching. If you have a story that you would like to share on this channel, please send it to my email, unit522stories@outlook.com. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button when notifications turned on. You can further support my channel by visiting the merch store. A link for that is in the description. You'll be hearing from me soon. Until next time, I'm your Uncle Unit. And as always, never forget. There's